This story delves into themes of isolation, psychological suspense, and the unsettling nature of the unknown. Listener discretion is advised. There's a specific kind of silence that only exists at 3 in the morning, in a 20-story corporate building designed for 1,000 people, when you're the only soul awake inside it. It's not the restful quiet of a sleeping house, or the hushed stillness of a forest. This is an engineered silence, heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 busy workdays, echoing with the absence of human chatter, clicking keyboards and ringing phones. It's a silence that presses in on you, tangible and profound, making every creak of settling steel, every hum of distant ventilation, feel like a shout. For David Miller, a man whose life revolved around the precise, predictable rhythms of the night shift, this silence was usually a comfort, a familiar blanket of solitude he'd grown accustomed to over the past 7 years. David was a creature of habit, 42 years old, a bit weathered around the edges, with a mustache that had seen better days and eyes that had seen far too many empty office chairs. He'd worked the graveyard shift at the Sterling Tower for so long, he knew the building better than its architects. He knew which floorboards creaked on the 8th floor, the exact spot where the fluorescent light flickered on the 17th, and the temperamental elevator button that always stuck on the 5th. His routine was his anchor: coffee at 11 p.m., first patrol at midnight, a quick check of the perimeter, then back to the security console, monitoring the dozens of screens that displayed the silent, unmoving corridors. Repeat every 2 hours until dawn. It was monotonous, yes, but it was predictable. And predictable for David meant safe. The Sterling Tower was an imposing structure of glass and steel in the heart of downtown, home to various law firms, tech startups, and the regional headquarters of a national bank. During the day, it buzzed with ambition and activity. At night, it became a mausoleum of ambition, a silent, dark monument to capitalism, overseen by David and his solitary watch. The first time the alert sounded, David barely registered it. It was 2:17 a.m., a soft electronic chime, instantly followed by a red flashing indicator on his main monitor. Motion sensor activated Zone 13C, the 13th floor. David's eyes, usually scanning the grid of cameras with practiced ease, flickered to the alert. He frowned, leaning forward slightly in his worn desk chair. Zone 13C was the reception area of Sterling and Finch, a mid-sized accounting firm. It was a wide-open space, usually bustling with clients during the day. At night, it was always empty. Probably a draft, David mumbled to himself, reaching for his cooling coffee mug. He'd seen it before. Old buildings, even modern ones, had their quirks. A sudden drop in temperature, a gust of wind through a poorly sealed window, even a large moth could sometimes trip a sensitive sensor. He made a mental note to check the HVAC on his next patrol, but for now he dismissed it. The red light stopped flashing. The silent grid of cameras resumed its hypnotic pattern. He returned to his crossword puzzle, a nightly ritual to keep his mind from turning to mush. He was just about to fill in 7-letter word for nocturnal bird of prey when the chime sounded again. 2:23 a.m. Motion sensor activated Zone 13C. David put his pen down a little more abruptly this time. Twice in 6 minutes. That was unusual. He pulled up the camera feed for the 13th floor. The reception area of Sterling and Finch appeared on screen, bathed in the eerie green glow of the night vision. Empty. Utterly, completely empty. The sleek, modern furniture sat undisturbed. The potted plants stood motionless. Not even a dust mote seemed to float in the air. He zoomed in, panning slowly across the room. Nothing. No sonidos. No movement. No sign of anything that could have triggered a sensor. He checked the other cameras on the 13th floor. The long, silent hallway leading to the offices, the empty break room, the still conference room. All clear. All silent. "All right, building," David muttered, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "Playing games, are we?" He picked up his radio. "Control to maintenance. This is David at Sterling Tower. Getting some nuisance alarms from 13C. Could you check the sensor logs remotely? See if there's a fault." A crackle, then the sleepy voice of Mark, the night maintenance tech, came through. "Copy that, David. Give me a minute." David waited, watching the silent screen. He didn't like these kinds of anomalies. They broke his rhythm, disturbed his peace. They introduced an element of the unknown into his carefully structured night. "Okay, David," Mark's voice returned. "Logs show the sensor triggered, but no error codes on the unit itself. Looks like a clean trigger. Could be a power fluctuation, I guess. Yeah, could be, David replied, though he didn't sound convinced. A power fluctuation usually affected more than one sensor, or caused a flicker in the lights. This was isolated. Keep an eye on it. I'll make an extra pass up there on my next rounds. He hung up the radio, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He tried to go back to his crossword, but the words blurred. His gaze kept drifting back to the 13th floor camera feed, still showing nothing but an empty green-tinged room. He decided not to wait for his scheduled patrol. He grabbed his flashlight, his keyring, and a small heavy maglite from the desk. Just a quick check, he told the empty room. Nothing to worry about. The elevator ride up was slow, the ascent accompanied by the low hum of the machinery, amplified in the oppressive silence. Each floor clicked by, a digital number on the panel counting up to 13. When the doors finally hissed open, David was met with absolute darkness. The 13th floor, like most of the building after hours, was entirely unlit. He flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting a crisp path through the gloom. The hallway stretched out before him, a long narrow tunnel of polished concrete and closed office doors. The air was still cool and carried the faint sterile scent of cleaning products. The silence here was even deeper than in the lobby, a thick, absorbing presence that seemed to swallow the sound of his own breathing. He walked slowly, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. His eyes scanned every shadow, every doorway. He felt a prickle of unease, a familiar sensation for a night guard in a large, empty building, but this time it was sharper, more persistent. He reached the Sterling and Finch reception area, the source of the phantom alarms. He pushed open the glass door, which swung inward with a soft whisper. The room was exactly as it had appeared on the monitor, impeccably tidy, utterly deserted. He swept his flashlight beam across every surface, the reception desk, the plush seating area, the framed corporate art on the walls. Nothing out of place. No open windows, no signs of forced entry. The heating vents were closed. There wasn't even a rogue insect buzzing around. David walked slowly, deliberately, into the center of the room, shining his light into every corner. He bent down, checking under the desks. He ran his hand over the top of a filing cabinet. He even peered into the small decorative water feature in the corner, half expecting to find something, anything that could explain the triggers. He found nothing. The motion sensor itself was a small, unobtrusive white box mounted high on the wall, directly across from the main entrance. It seemed perfectly secure, its small red indicator light dark. He stood there for a full minute, listening. The silence was absolute. He could hear the faint thumping of his own heart. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The feeling of being completely alone in such a vast, empty space began to morph from comfort into something more unsettling. It was the feeling that came when the silence felt too complete, when the absence of sound felt like a presence itself. "Hello," David called out, his voice sounding thin and small in the cavernous room. He knew it was stupid. He knew no one would answer. But he felt compelled to break the oppressive quiet. "Anyone here?" Only the echo of his own voice replied. He sighed, running a hand over his face. He was tired. That was it. Too many nights, too much coffee. His imagination was getting the better of him. He performed a quick, thorough check of the entire 13th floor, walking every corridor, peering into every office, trying every door handle. Everything was locked, secure, and undisturbed. Returning to the elevator, he pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors began to slide shut, he glanced back down the long, dark hallway. For a fleeting instant, just before the door sealed him in, he thought he saw a flicker of movement at the very end of the corridor, near the emergency exit stairwell. A shadow, perhaps, detaching itself from the deeper darkness. He blinked. It was gone. Just his tired eyes playing tricks on him. He shook his head, dismissing it. Back at his console, the familiar glow of the monitors was a welcome sight. He settled back into his chair, trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease. He made a note in his log. 13th floor motion sensor issue. Checked manually, all clear. Possible fault with unit. He was halfway through his crossword again, trying to remember a four-letter word for ancient Egyptian sun god, when the chime sounded for the third time. 3:05 a.m. Motion sensor activated zone 13C. David froze. His pen clattered onto the desk. He stared at the flashing red light, his heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't a draft. It wasn't a mouse. It wasn't a power fluctuation. He had just been up there. He had walked every inch of that floor. He had seen nothing. He pulled up the camera feed again. The same empty room. The same sterile green-tinged silence. But this time it felt different. The emptiness felt defiant, as if daring him to try and explain it away. He didn't speak to Mark on the radio this time. He didn't bother trying to rationalize it. A cold, hard certainty began to settle in his gut. There was something on the 13th floor. Something that was triggering the sensor. Something that was there even when the cameras showed nothing, and when David himself had walked through the space just minutes before. And whatever it was, it wasn't supposed to be. The silence of the Sterling Tower, once a comfort, now felt like a suffocating shroud. David looked at the flashing red light, then at the silent, unwavering image of the empty reception area. A profound sense of dread, cold and sharp, began to creep up his spine. The game had changed, and David Miller, the man of routine, suddenly found himself confronting a mystery that defied every logical explanation, deep within the heart of his perfectly predictable, perfectly empty building. He was alone, and he was no longer sure of what he was alone with. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, irregular drum against the silence of the control room. He stared at the screen, the blinking red icon on the 13th floor layout mocking his carefully constructed piece. A motion sensor. On the 13th floor. It was a violation of everything he knew. A direct challenge to the meticulous order he had cultivated over 2 decades of night shifts. He leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the console. He tried to rationalize it, to force the anomaly back into the realm of the explainable. A rodent, perhaps? A large rat scurrying across the floor, triggering the sensitive infrared beam. But the building was meticulously maintained, pest control a regular, thorough affair. And a rat big enough to trip a commercial-grade motion sensor on a wide-open floor? Unlikely. A powerful draft? No, the heating and cooling systems were sealed down for the night, the windows locked tight. He'd personally checked them during his rounds just a few hours ago, a ritual as ingrained as breathing. There were no open vents up there, no broken panes. The 13th floor was a tomb of forgotten ambition. Sealed off, silent and perpetually still. His mind replayed the events of the last hour. Everything had been normal. The usual quiet hum of the servers from the basement, the distant drone of the city outside, a comforting, mundane symphony of urban solitude. Now this, an anomaly, a breach in his perfectly ordered universe. The red dot pulsed, a tiny malevolent eye staring back at him from the unlit depths of the building. He knew what he had to do. His training dictated it. Any triggered alarm, no matter how improbable, how illogical, required investigation. He had to go up. To the 13th floor. The thought sent a cold shiver tracing its way down his spine, a premonition that had nothing to do with the building's temperature. He wasn't afraid of the dark. He wasn't afraid of empty buildings. He had spent years in them, a silent sentinel in a world of sleeping steel and glass. But this felt different. This felt watched. A feeling that had crept in the moment that red light had flared. A subtle, unsettling shift in the atmosphere of his solitary domain. He pushed himself away from the console, the squeak of his chair a harsh intrusion in the quiet. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight from its charging cradle, the solid, cold weight of it a small, reassuring comfort in his palm. He clipped his radio to his belt, the faint, reassuring static hiss a tether to the outside world, however tenuous. He took a deep breath, the stale, recycled air doing little to calm the frantic beat in his chest. His gaze drifted back to the monitor, the red dot still throbbing, a silent countdown to whatever awaited him. The elevator ride felt interminable, each floor number illuminated, then vanished, a slow, deliberate ascent into the unknown. The cable groaned above him, a metallic sigh in the oppressive silence, a sound usually unnoticed but now magnified, ominous. He watched his reflection in the polished steel doors, a gaunt, worried face staring back. His eyes, usually placid and observant, were wide, alert, scanning for anything, even within the confines of the elevator car. He gripped the flashlight tighter, its cool metal a grounding presence. The air in the elevator seemed to grow colder with each ascending floor, a preemptive chill for the desolation above. He reached the 12th floor. One more. The pit in his stomach tightened, a knot of dread. This was the floor that had been empty for years, a relic of a failed tech startup. Dust covers draped over forgotten furniture, a graveyard of ambition. It was always cold up there, always still. But the 13th floor was even more so. It was entirely unfurnished, stripped bare after the last tenant defaulted, leaving behind only the concrete shell and the ghosts of their dreams. The elevator chimed softly, a polite but unnerving announcement. The doors slid open with a whisper, revealing a cavernous darkness. The 13th floor. No lights were on, not even the emergency ones. The motion sensor light, which should have been glowing red or green if it was active, was dark. It was as if the system had reset itself after the initial trigger. The silence that greeted him was absolute, profound, a heavy blanket that seemed to absorb all sound, even the subtle hum of the building's infrastructure. It was a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence. Arthur stepped out, his boots echoing loudly on the polished concrete. The sound reverberated, bouncing off the bare walls, making the vast space feel even larger, more empty. He swept his powerful beam across the vast empty space. Where offices and cubicles once stood, only the faint outlines of their former positions remained on the floor, like archaeological digs. Dust motes danced in the beam, tiny galaxies in the deep, profound dark. The air was still, heavy, and strangely cold, despite the building's climate control. It carried a faint, almost metallic scent, a smell of disuse and stagnant air. He began his methodical search, moving slowly, deliberately. He checked each office alcove, each open space, peering into the gloom. The frantic beat of his own heart seemed amplified by the silence, a loud, insistent thrumming in his ears. Every creak of the old building, every distant hum of machinery from lower floors, seemed magnified, distorted into something ominous, something lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. He swept his light into every corner, under every window sill, along the base of every wall. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no open doors. Everything was exactly as it should be, perfectly undisturbed, coated in a fine, even layer of dust. But it wasn't. The motion sensor had gone off. He had seen it. He had heard the alarm. He reached the far end of the floor, near the fire exit stairs, his beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. He paused, his flashlight beam raking over the last row of what used to be cubicles. That's when he saw it. On the dusty surface of a low concrete ledge, right in the center of what had once been a manager's office, sat a single object. It was small, round, and vibrantly red. A rubber ball. A child's toy. Arthur frowned, a deep furrow appearing between his brows. This was impossible. The 13th floor had been cleared out years ago. No one had been up here, let alone a child. And the ball looked relatively new, its color bright and unfaded, not covered in the thick layer of dust that coated everything else. It stood out like a drop of blood on fresh snow. He approached cautiously, his flashlight beam fixed on the red sphere. It seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, an alien artifact in this desolate landscape. He reached out a gloved hand and picked it up. It was cold to the touch, smooth and slightly tacky like cheap rubber. No dust on it. None at all. It was pristine. His mind raced, trying to bridge the gap between this impossible object and his logical world. Had someone snuck in? A prank? But who would bother, and why leave a child's toy? It didn't make sense. And how did they get past him, past the locked doors, past the sophisticated security system, without tripping any other alarms? How did they place it so deliberately, so conspicuously, without leaving any other trace? He turned the ball over in his hand, examining it. There were no markings, no brand. Just plain red rubber. He slipped it into his pocket, a strange, unsettling weight against his thigh. It felt like a piece of evidence from a crime scene he couldn't comprehend. He stood there for a long moment, listening. The silence pressed in on him, thicker than before. No longer just an absence of sound, but a tangible, suffocating presence. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the unmistakable primal feeling of being watched. He spun around, sweeping his light frantically across the empty floor, the long, shadowy corridors. Nothing. Just shadows and dust dancing in the beam. He tried to shake off the feeling. It was just fatigue, he told himself. The stress of the situation. He was letting his imagination run wild, conjuring ghosts in the dark. He was alone. He had to be. He started to make his way back towards the elevator, his pace a little quicker now, a desperate desire to return to the illuminated safety of his control room overriding his professional obligation to be thorough. The rubber ball felt heavier in his pocket with every hurried step, a silent accusation. He was almost at the elevator bank when he heard it, a faint sound, barely audible above the frantic thumping of his own heart, above the blood rushing in his ears. A rhythmic soft tap. Tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the direction he was heading. It was coming from the other side of the floor, the side he had just meticulously searched, the side where he had found nothing but dust and shadows, and then the inexplicable red ball. Arthur froze. Every muscle in his body tensed, locking him in place. He held his breath, straining to hear it again, praying it was just his imagination, a trick of the building's settling timbers. Tup. It was faint, almost like water dripping, but too consistent, too deliberate. It was coming from the far corner of the floor, near where the executive suites used to be, an area he had just confirmed was utterly empty, utterly still. His flashlight beam wavered slightly in his trembling hand. He was no longer sure if he was alone, and the thought was far more terrifying than any intruder he had ever encountered, because an intruder would have a reason. This had no reason. He had to check it. He had to. It was his job, his duty. But every instinct screamed at him to run, to get back to the safety of his control room, to pretend he hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen anything, to just leave the red ball and the tapping to the impenetrable mystery they clearly were. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air burning in his lungs. Slowly, reluctantly, he turned back towards the sound. The darkness seemed to deepen around him, swallowing the light from his beam, drawing him further into its cold, silent embrace. The rhythmic tap, 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 continued, a siren call into the unknown, pulling him deeper into a mystery he now knew with bone-chilling certainty was far beyond anything he could ever logically explain. Every nerve ending in Michael's body screamed for him to run, to sprint back to the elevator and descend into the comforting, if mundane, reality of the ground floor. But the rhythmic tap, 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 continued, a siren call into the unknown, pulling him deeper into a mystery he now knew, with bone-chilling certainty, was far beyond anything he could ever logically explain. It wasn't the creaking of old pipes, or the settling of concrete, or the distant hum of machinery. This was deliberate, precise, a soft yet insistent rhythm that resonated not just in the air, but deep within his chest, a counterpoint to the frantic pounding of his own heart. His training as a security officer, drilled into him over years, warred with a primal instinctual dread. Every fiber of his being urged him to flee, but a chilling compulsion, a morbid curiosity, held him captive, demanding answers. He swallowed hard, the dryness in his throat a stark reminder of his terror, and took a tentative step forward. The air grew heavier, colder, as if he were walking into a different dimension, a pocket of frozen time within the bustling city. Each breath he took felt shallow, inadequate, as if the very oxygen was being stolen from him. The red glow of the motion sensor still burned above him, a silent, mocking witness to his solitary vigil, confirming that something was here, even if he couldn't see it. The tap, 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 echoed, a ghostly compass guiding him further into the labyrinthine silence of the 13th floor. He moved with agonizing slowness, his heavy boots making no sound on the plush carpet, as if the floor itself was absorbing the noise. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, a trembling spear of light probing the inky blackness that clung to the corners of the vast, deserted space. Long, dimly lit corridors stretched out, each office door a dark rectangle of unknown secrets, waiting. He peered into the glass panels of conference rooms, seeing only his own terrified reflection staring back from the void. The sound was no longer distant but immediate, almost intimate. It seemed to emanate from a large office at the very end of the main corridor, an executive suite that usually belonged to a senior partner, rarely occupied past 7 p.m. As he approached, he saw it. The door to the executive suite, usually locked and secured for the night, was slightly ajar, a sliver of deeper darkness visible within, beckoning him. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to stop, to turn back, to call for backup that wouldn't come. But something else, a force he couldn't name, compelled him forward. He reached the doorframe, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped the flashlight. With a trembling hand, he pushed the door open, The faint squeal of the hinges, a deafening roar in the profound silence. The moment the door swung wide, the tapping ceased. Abruptly. Completely. The sudden cessation was almost worse than the sound itself, leaving behind a vacuum of silence, so profound it felt like a physical pressure on his eardrums. He stood on the threshold, frozen, his flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc through the dark interior of the office. It was a large, opulent space, with a panoramic window that offered a stunning, if now terrifying, view of the sleeping city. His beam danced across polished wood, a large leather executive chair, a bookshelf filled with weighty tomes and framed degrees on the wall. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones, a sensation far deeper than mere chills. It felt like an invisible presence had just taken root beside him, observing, waiting. The air in the room was palpably colder than the corridor outside. A sudden, unnatural drop in temperature that made him shiver despite himself. He could see his own breath misting in the beam of his flashlight. Then, his beam settled on something incongruous, sitting squarely in the middle of the executive's expansive desk. A small, ornate wooden music box, dark with age, intricately carved with swirling patterns of leaves and vines. It looked ancient, a relic from another era, completely out of place amidst the modern, minimalist decor of the office. It was the kind of object one might find in an antique shop, not on the desk of a high-powered corporate lawyer. Against his better judgment, driven by a morbid curiosity he couldn't suppress, Michael took a step closer, then another. His boots made no sound on the thick carpet, yet the silence felt charged, expectant. He felt an undeniable pull towards the object, as if it were exerting a magnetic force on him. His hand, clammy with sweat, extended towards the music box, intending to examine it, perhaps even open it. But before his fingertips could even brush the cold wood, a faint, delicate melody began to drift from the box. A tinkling, almost mournful tune, like a child's lullaby played on rusty strings, filled the suffocating silence of the room. It was beautiful, haunting, and utterly impossible. The lid of the music box was still closed, yet the music, clear and distinct, poured from within its dark, carved confines. Michael snatched his hand back as if burned, his breath catching in his throat. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror, fixed on the impossible object. He could feel the blood draining from his face, leaving him numb. This was it. This was undeniable. His rational mind shattered, replaced by an overwhelming primal fear. In his peripheral vision, he saw it, the red glow of the motion sensor light in the corridor outside the office, the one that had been a constant, unnerving companion, suddenly extinguished. The hallway plunged into complete darkness. He was now alone in the office, with the music box playing its impossible melody, the only illumination his trembling flashlight beam. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Michael's throat. He was trapped. He spun around, desperate to escape. But as he turned, the heavy executive door behind him, which had been left slightly ajar, slammed shut with a resounding, bone-jarring crack. A sickening click echoed in the sudden silence that followed the slam, sealing his fate. He lunged at the door, twisting the handle frantically. Locked. He pounded on the thick wood, yelling, but his voice sounded thin, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the 13th floor. He tried again, shoulder-checking the solid oak, but it held firm, unyielding. He spun back, his eyes fixed on the music box still sitting on the desk, its impossible melody continuing its eerie serenade. And then, as if an unseen hand guided it, the intricately carved lid of the music box began to slowly, deliberately creak open. Slowly, agonizingly, the gap widened, revealing not a twirling ballerina, but something else entirely. Nestled on a bed of faded velvet, gleaming faintly in the beam of his flashlight, was a small tarnished silver key. The moment the lid fully opened, the haunting melody abruptly ceased, leaving a stark, ringing silence in its wake. Michael stared at the key, then at the locked door, then back at the key. A single terrifying thought echoed in his mind, chilling him to his very core. The key was a message, and he had a horrifying feeling he knew exactly what kind of door it was meant to unlock. The key. It wasn't just a random object. It was a deliberate placement. A breadcrumb leading him deeper into the labyrinth of the building's secrets. The horrifying feeling solidified into a chilling certainty. This key was for the locked storage room on the 13th floor. The room that pulsed with phantom motion. The room that had defied every attempt to access it. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent security office. He could just ignore it, he told himself. He could put the key in the lost and found, file a report about a strange object, and pretend none of this was happening. He was a security guard, not a detective. His job was to observe, to report, to maintain order, not to unravel a mystery that felt increasingly sinister. But the thought was a lie, and he knew it. The mystery had already found him. It was whispering from the empty hallways, flickering in the motion sensor logs, and now it was a cold, heavy piece of metal in his palm. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when the answer felt so agonizingly close, yet so terrifyingly out of reach. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Michael stood up. The fluorescent lights hummed above him, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe with his unease. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a primal vulnerability in the empty building. Every creak of the old structure, every distant hum of machinery, seemed amplified, imbued with a sinister intent. He checked his watch. It was past 3 in the morning. The city outside was asleep, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding within these glass walls. He grabbed his flashlight, its beam cutting a stark path through the dimness. The key felt heavier now, a leaden weight pulling him towards the unknown. The elevator ride up to the 13th floor was agonizing. Each ascending floor felt like a descent into deeper dread. The numbers blinked slowly, impersonally, marking his progress towards a confrontation he both craved and feared. He stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors, a pale, anxious face staring back. Was he being foolish? Reckless? Or was this the only way to reclaim his peace of mind? To finally understand what was truly happening? The elevator chimed softly, a sound that usually signified arrival and relief, but tonight, it sounded like a death knell. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the familiar sterile hallway of the 13th floor. It was exactly as he remembered it from his previous patrols. Rows of identical office doors, muted carpet, the faint scent of stale air conditioning. But tonight it felt different. Charged. Expectant. As if the very walls were holding their breath. He stepped out, his boots making soft, almost imperceptible sounds on the carpet. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket pressing down on him. No distant traffic hum, no subtle vibrations from other floors. Just the faint, high-pitched whine of the building's internal systems, a sound that usually blended into the background but now seemed to drill directly into his ears. He gripped the flashlight tighter, its beam dancing nervously ahead of him. He knew exactly where the room was. It was at the far end of the corridor, tucked away beyond the main cluster of offices, almost an afterthought in the building's design. As he approached, his heart began to pound anew. This was it. The source of the phantom motion, the locus of the unsettling anomaly that had plagued his nights. He could see the door now, a plain, unmarked wooden door, indistinguishable from any other, save for the fact that it was locked, and his key was meant for it. He reached the door, his hand trembling slightly as he raised the key. The metal was cold against his fingertips. He hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. What if this was a mistake? What if he was about to unleash something he couldn't control? The rational part of his brain screamed at him to turn back, to leave it alone, to call the police, to call his supervisor, to do anything but open that door. But the other part, the part fueled by a desperate need for answers, for resolution, pushed him forward. He couldn't live with the not knowing. With a surge of resolve, he slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, a silent, sickening confirmation of his fears. The tumblers clicked, a soft, metallic whisper in the profound silence. He turned the key, and the lock yielded with a faint, almost imperceptible click. The sound echoed in his ears, a monumental event in the stillness of the night. He pulled the key out, his hand still shaking. He pushed the door open slowly, cautiously. It moved without a sound, swinging inward into absolute darkness. He aimed his flashlight into the void. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing a small rectangular room. It was a storage closet, just as he'd suspected. Shelves lined one wall, mostly empty. A few dusty boxes stacked haphazardly on the floor. Nothing immediately jumped out at him. No monsters, no blood, no obvious signs of a struggle. Just emptiness. A wave of anticlimax washed over him, quickly followed by a fresh surge of dread. This wasn't right. The motion sensor had been tripped repeatedly, consistently for weeks. A faulty sensor might explain a single ghost reading, but not a persistent pattern. And the key? Why go to such lengths to hide a key to an empty storage room? He stepped inside, his senses on high alert. The air was stale, heavy, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible odor he couldn't quite place. Not mold, not dust, something else. Something organic? He swept the flashlight beam across the shelves. Empty. Crossed the floor. A thin layer of dust covered everything undisturbed, except for one small section near the back wall. His heart leaped into his throat. There, on the dusty concrete floor, was a clear, distinct outline where something had been sitting. A perfect rectangle slightly larger than a shoebox, where the dust had been wiped clean. And next to it, a faint, almost invisible scuff mark, like something had been dragged. His beam moved slowly, meticulously over the area. It wasn't just undisturbed dust. It was disturbed dust in a specific pattern. Someone had definitely been here recently, and they had taken something. He crouched down, examining the area more closely. The faint organic smell was stronger here. He ran his gloved finger along the edge of the clean rectangle. It was sharp, recent. Whatever had been here, it hadn't been gone for long. His flashlight beam played over the floor again, searching, and then he saw it. Tucked almost invisibly into the small gap between the baseboard and the concrete floor, half hidden by a stray piece of lint, was something small and dark. He reached for it, his fingers fumbling with a strange mix of apprehension and urgency. It was a small, crudely folded piece of paper. Not a business card, not an office memo. This was personal. He unfolded it carefully, his heart thumping against his ribs like a trapped bird. It was a drawing. A child's drawing, done in crayon, vibrant and unsettling. It depicted a stick figure, unmistakably a child, standing in front of a tall building. The building had many windows, and one of them, on the 13th floor, was colored a stark, angry red. Above the building, a large yellow sun with a frowning face. And then the detail that made his blood run cold. Another stick figure, much smaller, barely visible, standing in the red window on the 13th floor, its tiny arms outstretched as if waving, or perhaps as if falling. Underneath the drawing, scrawled in shaky, childish letters, were two words. Just two words, but they hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs, chilling him to his very core. He watches. The small, crudely drawn figure seemed to writhe in his hand, a silent scream trapped on faded paper. The words beneath it. He watches, echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of the 13th floor, a silence that now felt less empty and more occupied. Michael's breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He wasn't just looking at a drawing. He was looking at a message, a warning delivered by an unseen hand. His mind raced, a frantic scramble for a rational explanation. Prank, he told himself. Some bored teenagers years ago, sneaking in, leaving a childish scare. But the paper felt crisp, not brittle with age. The crayon marks, faint as they were, didn't look like they'd been sitting in an abandoned space for decades. And the placement, tucked away behind a heavy, forgotten filing cabinet, almost as if it was meant to be found by someone looking specifically for something hidden. The cold that had been a persistent companion on this floor now felt like a living presence, wrapping around him, seeping into his bones. He remembered the whispers, the fleeting shadows, the inexplicable motion sensor triggers that had plagued him for weeks. He dismissed them as drafts, faulty wiring, his own overactive imagination. But he watches changed everything. It wasn't a malfunction. It was deliberate. It was personal. He stared at the drawing again, the single stick figure child, its arms either reaching out or flailing. The empty circles for eyes, devoid of any discernible emotion, seemed to bore into him. Was this child a victim? Or a messenger? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through him. Who would draw such a thing? And why here? A shiver, not from the cold, snaked up his spine. Michael felt an undeniable urge to bolt, to get off this floor, to call David and demand a transfer. But another, stronger impulse held him captive. Curiosity, a desperate need for answers, warred with his terror. He couldn't leave it. Not now. Not when the pieces, however fragmented and terrifying, were finally starting to fall into place. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the stale air doing little to calm his racing heart. His flashlight beam, which had seemed so powerful just moments ago, now felt like a fragile, flickering shield against an encroaching darkness. He carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his pocket, an unspoken promise to himself to protect this fragile clue. Then he began to search again, not with the cursory sweep of a security guard checking for open windows, but with the meticulous, almost frantic intensity of someone hunting for a ghost. Every shadow held a potential secret, every discarded item a possible clue. He moved slowly, deliberately, his ears strained for any sound beyond the frantic thumping of his own heart. The floorboards creaked under his weight, each groan amplified in the oppressive quiet. He swept his light over the dusty desks, the overturned chairs, the mountains of forgotten files. Nothing, just the detritus of a long-abandoned office. He checked behind more filing cabinets, under desks, even inside the drawers, pulling them open to reveal stacks of yellowed invoices and forgotten office supplies. Still nothing. Then in a corner, tucked beneath a collapsed ceiling tile near what must have once been a reception area, his light caught something. It was small, no bigger than his palm, and almost completely obscured by dust and debris. He knelt down, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He reached out a trembling hand and carefully brushed away the grime. It was a doll. Not a modern plastic toy, but an old porcelain doll, perhaps from the early 20th century. Its dress was faded and torn, its porcelain face cracked in places, but even through the grime, he could see the intricate details of its painted features. Except for one thing. One of its eyes was missing. A hollow socket stared back at him, a gaping void that somehow made the doll seem even more unsettling. The other eye, a pale blue, seemed to follow his movements, a silent, unblinking gaze. He picked it up, feeling the surprising weight of the porcelain in his hand. It was cold, strangely colder than the already frigid air of the floor. He turned it over, examining the tattered fabric, the delicate, almost lifelike hands. Why would an antique doll be here? An isolated relic from a bygone era. And why was it missing an eye? As he pondered this, a sudden sharp draft snaked around his ankles, sending a fresh wave of goosebumps across his skin. He looked up, his flashlight beam sweeping across the ceiling. He noticed a small air vent, set low on the wall, almost at floor level, directly above where he'd found the doll. It seemed slightly ajar, not fully secured. A faint metallic clang echoed from within, as if something had just shifted. He lowered himself onto his knees again, the doll still clutched in his hand. He peered into the vent, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. It was dark, dusty, filled with cobwebs. But deep within, reflecting the light, he saw a faint glimmer. A tiny point of light, like a star in a black sky. He leaned closer, squinting, trying to make sense of it. And then he saw it. Staring back at him, perfectly centered within the narrow confines of the vent, was the missing eye of the doll. It wasn't just lying there. It was wedged deliberately into a small crevice, positioned to look outward, directly at anyone who might peer in. It was a pale blue, identical to the doll's remaining eye, but detached, isolated, and infinitely more menacing. Michael recoiled, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. His mind struggled to process the implications. Someone or something had placed it there. Placed it to watch. The words from the drawing screamed in his head. He watches. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a malfunction. This was real. And it was here. With him. He scrambled backward, away from the vent, away from the doll, away from the chilling, disembodied eye. His flashlight beam danced erratically across the walls, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold it steady. Every shadow seemed to deepen, to coalesce into something monstrous. The silence of the floor was no longer empty. It was filled with an unseen presence, a malevolent awareness. He backed up against a desk, knocking over a stack of old files with a loud clatter that made him jump. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, trying to regain control, to silence the panic screams in his head. This was too much. The drawing, the doll, the eye in the vent, it was all connected, all designed to terrify. When he opened his eyes, he swept the flashlight around the room again, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone. Or was he? Just then, from deeper within the floor, down a long dark corridor he hadn't fully explored, a single sharp click echoed through the silence. It was the distinct sound of a motion sensor activating. The small red LED light, barely visible in the oppressive darkness, flickered to life, a silent accusation, a confirmation of his deepest fear. It wasn't just watching him, it was moving, and it knew he was there. His breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. The small red LED, a malevolent eye in the gloom, pulsed once, then settled into a steady glow. It wasn't random. It wasn't a glitch. It was a signal, a confirmation so stark, so undeniable. It ripped a silent scream from his chest that only he could hear. He swung his flashlight, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, searching frantically for the source, for anything. Nothing. Just the vast empty expanse of the 13th floor, stretching out like a forgotten tomb. The air still, heavy, thick with the scent of dust and stale air conditioning. The silence was so profound it felt like a pressure against his eardrums, broken only by the frantic thumping of his own heart. But then another light. Further down the corridor, perhaps 50 feet from the first, another red pinprick ignited. Then another just beyond that. A slow, deliberate procession of crimson eyes, winking into existence, one after the other, moving deeper into the labyrinthine layout of the executive suites. It wasn't just activating, it was leading him, or perhaps luring him. A silent, terrifying game of follow the leader, played out in the dead of night, on a floor that was supposed to be empty. Every instinct screamed at Michael to turn, to run, to evacuate the building and call the police, the fire department, a priest. His mind, usually so rational, was a chaotic mess of primal fear and logical disbelief. Was he finally losing it? Had the isolation of the night shifts, the constant vigilance, finally broken something inside him? Was this some elaborate prank, some sick joke orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee with access to the building's schematics? But who could pull off something like this so flawlessly, so silently? No, this felt different. This felt intelligent, malevolent. His training, his stubborn sense of duty, and a morbid curiosity he couldn't shake, held him rooted for a moment longer. He was the security guard. This was his shift. This was supposed to be his building, his domain. He couldn't just abandon it to whatever this was. A cold resolve, thin as ice, formed beneath the panic. He had to know. He had to see. He moved forward, one cautious step at a time, his heavy boots echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. Each footfall seemed to reverberate, a drumbeat counting down to an unknown confrontation. His flashlight beam danced ahead, trying to pierce the shadows that seemed to cling to every corner, every cubicle wall, every filing cabinet. The air grew colder, a damp, metallic chill that felt like it was seeping into his bones, a stark contrast to the sweat now beading on his forehead. The sequence of lights continued, a breadcrumb trail of terror. They led him past rows of vacant desks, their monitors dark, their keyboards silent, like frozen sentinels guarding nothing. Past conference rooms where phantom meetings seemed to linger in the stale air, the chairs pushed in, waiting for occupants who would never arrive. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the prickle on the back of his neck, the chilling certainty that whatever was activating those sensors was aware of his every move, anticipating his next step. It was playing with him, a cat toying with a mouse, drawing him deeper into its web. He kept his hand on the pepper spray holstered at his hip, his grip tight on the heavy metal of his flashlight. These were his only defenses, pitifully inadequate against an unseen, unknown entity that seemed to defy all logic. He tried to rationalize it again. Malfunctioning system? A power surge? But the lights were too deliberate, too sequential. They were leading him with purpose. The trail of red LEDs finally stopped at the entrance to what he knew was the executive lounge, a rarely used space reserved for high-level meetings and VIPs. The door, usually locked and secured with a heavy magnetic latch Michael himself had checked just hours ago, was now slightly ajar. A sliver of deeper darkness beckoned from within. A cold sweat broke out on Michael's brow, his breath catching in his throat. He pushed the door open slowly, the heavy oak groaning softly on its hinges, the sound amplified tenfold in the oppressive quiet. The lounge was even darker than the main corridor, the windows shrouded by thick, velvet drapes that blocked out any hint of the city lights below. Felt like walking into a void. His flashlight beam swept across plush leather sofas, an expensive, polished mahogany table Michael knew had been imported from Italy, and a small built-in bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. Everything seemed undisturbed at first glance. The cushions were plump, the bar stools neatly tucked away. No sign of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no obvious struggle. But then, as his beam lingered on the mahogany table, he saw it. On the polished surface, amidst the faint, undisturbed layer of dust that always seemed to settle in unused rooms, was a single, perfectly formed impression. Not a smudge, not a partial. A complete, clear print, as if someone had deliberately pressed their thumb down with firm, measured intent. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He knew with chilling certainty that this print had not been there when he last checked the floor. And it was too pristine to be old, too sharp to be accidental. It was fresh. It had been left there recently, after he had made his rounds, after he had secured this very room. He leaned closer, his flashlight beam narrowing to focus on the anomaly. The fear that had been a dull ache beneath his ribs now flared into full-blown terror. The print wasn't from a human thumb. It was too large, the ridges too pronounced, the overall shape subtly wrong. It was elongated, almost claw-like in its definition, yet undeniably a print, a pattern left by a living hand. The skin around the edges of the print seemed to have been pressed with an unnatural force, leaving a faint, almost invisible indentation in the wood itself. It wasn't just a mark. It was an etching, a deliberate message. Michael felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He wasn't dealing with a prankster or a thief. He wasn't even dealing with a person. This was something else entirely. Something that could move through the building undetected, activate motion sensors at will, and leave behind a physical imprint that defied human anatomy. He pulled back, his eyes darting around the room, the flashlight beam now trembling slightly in his hand. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the very air itself was watching him. The silence of the lounge, once merely oppressive, now felt predatory. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey, drawn into a trap, cornered by an intelligence far beyond his comprehension. The print on the table wasn't just a clue. It was a challenge, a taunt. It was saying, I was here. And I know you're here too. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. What kind of creature leaves a print like that? And why here? Why now? He thought back to the strange power fluctuations, the cold spots, the unsettling feeling that had plagued him for weeks. It wasn't just in his head. It was real. And it was here on the 13th floor waiting. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound echoed from behind the heavy velvet drapes covering the far window. It was so soft, so subtle, he almost dismissed it as his imagination, a symptom of his escalating panic. But then it came again, a slow, deliberate scrape, like fingernails dragging across glass. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the room. Michael froze, his breath catching in his throat, a cold tendril of fear snaking its way up his spine. The air in the opulent office, moments ago merely still, now felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. He wasn't alone. The scraping sound, thin and sharp, like a fingernail dragging across a tightly stretched membrane, echoed again, unmistakably from within the room. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the building settling. It was deliberate. His flashlight beam, which had been steady, now trembled in his grip, casting erratic shadows that danced like specters on the polished mahogany walls and the plush carpet. He slowly, agonizingly slowly, pivoted, his eyes darting frantically across the room. The CEO's office, a testament to power and success by day, was transformed into an arena of dread under the stark, wavering light. The massive, imposing desk, the plush leather chairs, the impressive collection of framed awards, all seemed to hold their breath, waiting. The sound came a third time, closer now, a chilling whisper of friction that seemed to emanate directly from the vicinity of Richard Thorne's colossal mahogany desk. Michael swallowed hard, the sound a dry rasp in his own ears. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and run, to burst out of this room and never look back. But the image of the continually triggering motion sensor, the thought of his job, and a stubborn, terrifying curiosity rooted him to the spot. He had to know. He needed to know. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his heavy security boots sounding unnaturally loud on the thick carpet. Each step was a battle against his own paralyzing fear. His flashlight beam, a shaky spear of light, focused on the desk. It was an antique piece, dark and gleaming, with intricate carvings along its edges. Nothing seemed out of place. The neatly stacked papers, the expensive pin set, the framed family photos all sat undisturbed. He circled the desk slowly, his eyes scanning every surface, every shadow. He crouched, shining the light underneath, checking the sturdy legs, the hidden conduits. Nothing. He stood again, his gaze sweeping across the desktop, searching for some anomaly, some minute detail that could explain the impossible. and then he saw it. Almost imperceptible, a faint, wispy scratch on the highly polished surface of the desk, near the edge where Thorn would typically rest his arm. It was so fine, so delicate, it could have been a stray hair, a trick of the light. He leaned in closer, his heart thumping against his ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't a random scratch. It was a series of tiny, almost microscopic lines, forming an irregular pattern. As he focused, his breath hitched. It looked deliberate, like someone had painstakingly, perhaps even desperately, etched it into the wood. Before he could process the implications, the scraping sound erupted again, not from the desk, not from across the room, but directly beside his ear. It was a sudden violent shriek of friction, so close, so visceral, he actually felt a phantom brush of cold air against his cheek. Michael yelped, a strangled sound of pure terror, stumbling backward, tripping over his own feet, and crashing clumsily into Thorn's plush leather executive chair. The chair spun wildly on its casters, sending him reeling. He scrambled to regain his balance, his flashlight clattering onto the carpet, plunging the immediate area into deeper shadow. Panic flared, hot and suffocating. He fumbled for the light, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it again. When he finally seized it and brought the beam back up, his eyes were wide, darting, searching for anything. But there was nothing. No one. Just the empty, silent office, now feeling even more oppressive. He was alone. But the sensation of being watched, of being toyed with, was overwhelmingly real. His gaze fell back to the desk, to the faint scratch. He pushed himself upright, his legs unsteady, and approached it again. The scratch in his mind now seemed deeper, more pronounced, almost as if it had been freshly made. He reached out a trembling finger, hesitant to touch it, as if afraid it might burn him. As his fingertip hovered just above the mark, a new sensation washed over him. A profound chill, localized and intense, descended upon that specific spot on the desk, radiating out from the scratch. It was like touching a block of ice in a warm room. He recoiled instantly, pulling his hand back as if burned. This wasn't a draft. This wasn't a temperature fluctuation. This was something unnatural. Michael felt a profound shift in his understanding. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a faulty sensor. This was something else entirely. Something beyond the scope of his training, beyond the realm of logic. He thought of the relentless motion sensor triggering night after night, as if desperately trying to draw attention to this very spot. As if something was trying to communicate. He looked up at the imposing portrait of Richard Thorn that hung on the wall behind the desk. Thorn's eyes, usually conveying shrewd intelligence, now seemed to hold a dark, unreadable quality, following Michael's every move. It was just a painting, he told himself, but the illusion was unsettling. He forced himself to calm his racing mind, to look for a rational explanation, however faint. What if the sound wasn't on the desk, but from within it? He began to systematically check the desk drawers, tugging at the ornate brass handles. All were securely locked. He pressed along the edges, searching for a hidden release, a secret catch. Thorn was known for his love of antique furniture and its hidden complexities. His fingers traced the elaborate carvings on the desk's facade, near the top edge, just below the desktop. He felt for any give, any subtle seam, and then his thumb brushed against a tiny, almost imperceptible protrusion, a slightly raised grain in the wood that felt out of place. It was no bigger than a pinhead, cleverly disguised within the intricate pattern. He pressed it experimentally with slightly more force. There was a soft, almost inaudible click. Michael froze, his heart leaping into his throat. He pulled his hand back quickly, staring at the spot. A small, narrow panel, no wider than his hand, had subtly popped open on the side of the desk, perfectly camouflaged by the dark wood. It was a hidden compartment tucked away, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He hesitated for only a second, the lure of the unknown overpowering his fear. He took a deep, shuddering breath and reached a trembling hand toward the opening. He peered into the darkness within, shining his flashlight inside. It was a shallow space, barely deep enough to hold a small item, and it wasn't empty. Nestled within the velvet-lined recess was a single object, a tarnished silver locket. It was old, intricately engraved, and dulled by age, its surface marred by countless tiny scratches. It lay there, seemingly inert, yet it radiated the same profound chill Michael had felt from the desk's surface. As his fingers closed around the cold metal of the locket, a shiver, unlike any he had ever experienced, ran through his entire body. It wasn't just cold. It felt heavy with history, imbued with a silent, sorrowful energy. He carefully pulled it from its hiding place, turning it over in his palm. It was heavier than it looked solid. He tried to open it to see what secrets it held within. The clasp was stiff, perhaps rusted, or simply tightly sealed. He fumbled with it, his fingers clumsy with a mixture of dread and anticipation. As he pressed harder on the clasp, a faint sound reached his ears. It wasn't the scraping. This was different. It was a whisper. So soft, so ethereal, it was barely more than a breath of air, like the rustle of dry leaves on a distant wind. But there was no wind here. It was right there, in the silent, suffocating air of the CEO's office. The sound wasn't a language he could understand, not at first. It was just a mournful, drawn-out murmur. Then, as he continued to struggle with the locket, the whisper solidified, coalescing into a single, agonizingly clear word. A name. A woman's name, spoken with a sorrow so profound it seemed to tear at the very fabric of the air. Eleanor. The locket in his hand felt like it vibrated, a faint tremor running through the cold silver, or perhaps it was just the intensity of his own terror, the blood pounding in his ears. The whisper faded, leaving only the oppressive silence, now charged with a new, deeply personal tragedy. Michael stared at the locket, his mind reeling. Eleanor. Who was Eleanor? And what did she have to do with Richard Thorne, the 13th floor, and the unexplainable horrors of his night shift? The answers he knew were locked away, not just within the locket, but within the dark heart of this building itself. Who was Eleanor? And what did she have to do with Richard Thorne, the 13th floor, and the unexplainable horrors of his night shift? The answers he knew were locked away, not just within the locket, but within the dark heart of this building itself. Michael's fingers trembled as he held the locket, its cold metal a stark contrast to the sudden burning urgency in his chest. He turned it over and over, his gaze searching for any hidden catch, any secret compartment he might have missed. The silver was tarnished with age, but beneath the grime, a faint, almost invisible inscription revealed itself on the inner surface. He squinted, angling it under the dim security desk lamp. The looping cursive was faded but undeniably there. Eleanor Vance, October 1973. My eternal regret. Eleanor Vance. Not just Eleanor. And a full date, a specific month and year. October 1973. The RT could only be Richard Thorne. The words, my eternal regret, sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't a love token. It was a confession, a burden, a mark of something terrible. It was a direct link to the man who now owned the building, and to a woman whose name whispered from the shadows of the 13th floor. The locket felt heavier in his palm, weighted with history, with sorrow, with a truth that had been buried for decades. Michael knew with chilling certainty that this was the key. This date, these names, they weren't just random details. They were the coordinates of a hidden past, a dark chapter in the building's history that had been deliberately obscured. He had to find out what happened in October 1973. He had to uncover the story of Eleanor Vance and Richard Thorne, and he knew just where to start looking. During his years as a security guard, Michael had heard whispers, mostly from older maintenance staff, about a forgotten archive in the subbasement. A place where old blueprints, construction logs, and administrative records from the building's earliest days were supposedly stored. A dusty, neglected repository of the building's entire life story. No one ever went down there anymore. Most people probably didn't even know it existed. But Michael remembered. With a newfound resolve, Michael grabbed his flashlight and his master key card. The thought of venturing into the deepest, most forgotten part of the building, especially after all he'd experienced, usually would have filled him with dread. But now it was replaced by a singular, burning need for answers. He had to know. For Eleanor, for himself, for the sanity of his night shift. The journey to the subbasement was eerily quiet. The elevator descended with a groan, stopping at a level usually reserved for utility access and the deepest mechanical rooms. The air grew colder, heavier, smelling of damp concrete and stagnant dust. He navigated through a maze of pipes and dimly lit corridors, his flashlight beam cutting through absolute darkness until he found a heavy, unmarked steel door, partially obscured by cobwebs. The lock was old, a simple mechanical one, easily bypassed by his master key. The door creaked open with a sound like a dying gasp, revealing a cavernous room swallowed by shadows. The air inside was thick and still, laden with the scent of decaying paper and forgotten time. Shelves floor to ceiling lined the walls, overflowing with cardboard boxes, rolled-up blueprints, and ancient filing cabinets. Dust motes danced in the single beam of his flashlight, illuminated like spectral particles in a forgotten realm. This was it, the building's memory. Michael stepped inside, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft thud that echoed ominously in the vast space. He felt an immediate drop in temperature, a familiar chill that now accompanied his search for the truth. He moved cautiously between the towering stacks, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He needed to find anything related to the building's construction in the early 1970s, anything that mentioned Eleanor Vance or Richard Thorne around October 1973. He started with boxes labeled Construction Logs 1970 to 1974 and Personnel Records, Early Years. The sheer volume of material was daunting, but he worked methodically, his eyes scanning for the crucial names and date. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rustle of old paper and the frantic beat of his own pulse. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only an hour or so, he struck gold. Tucked away in a box marked Personnel VZ, he found a manila folder. The name on the tab made his breath catch. Vance Eleanor. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, a faded photograph of a vibrant young woman with kind eyes smiled up at him. Eleanor. She was beautiful, full of life. It made the words "eternal regret" on the locket even more poignant. The file listed her as a junior architect, hired in 1972. Her last day of employment was officially recorded as October 27, 1973, with a stark, cold note scrawled in red ink. Voluntary resignation, no forwarding address. Disappeared from premises. Disappeared. The word hung in the air, chilling him to the bone. It wasn't a resignation. It was a vanishing act, and it coincided exactly with the date on the locket. He continued his search, fueled by a growing sense of dread. He found another file, this one for Thorne Richard. It confirmed his role as a senior project manager during the building's construction. Then, in a separate box containing internal memos project management, he found a series of documents from late October and early November 1973, all bearing Richard Thorne's signature. One memo, dated October 29, 1973, was addressed to the construction foreman, authorizing expedited structural adjustments and immediate sealing off of a temporary storage area on the 13th floor due to unforeseen minor structural anomalies. Another memo, dated November 5, 1973, confirmed the completion of these adjustments and the permanent restriction of access to that specific area on the 13th floor. His mind raced, piecing together fragments. Disappeared from premises. Minor structural anomalies. Expedited adjustments. Permanent restriction of access on the 13th floor. It was all too specific, too convenient. This wasn't a simple construction issue. This was a cover-up. He then located a large rolled-up set of blueprints. He unfurled them carefully, revealing the original architectural plans for the building, dated early 1973. He found the 13th floor layout. It showed an open-plan office space, a typical floor. He then found a second set of blueprints, dated December 1973, marked revised. On the 13th floor, a section that was previously an open office area was now clearly marked. Storage access restricted. Structural integrity compromised. This section, he realized with a jolt, directly corresponded to the exact zone where the motion sensor on the 13th floor constantly triggered, where he'd heard the whispers, where the cold spots manifested. The air in the archive room grew heavy, oppressive. A frigid gust of wind, though there were no open windows or vents, swept through the shelves, rustling the old papers. The beam of his flashlight flickered, momentarily plunging the room into deeper shadow. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the distinct feeling of being watched, not by a physical presence, but by something unseen, desperate to be heard. He ignored it, his eyes glued to the blueprints, his mind racing. He was getting closer. He knew it. Then, tucked beneath a stack of old building permits, he found it. Not an official document, not a typed memo, but a single yellowed sheet of paper, torn from a notepad. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. It was a note, dated November 10, 1973, and addressed to Artie. Michael held his breath, his eyes devouring the words. Artie, the Vance situation is handled. The 13th floor area has been sealed. No one will ever find her. You're safe. D. No one will ever find her. The words echoed in the absolute silence of the sub-basement, chilling him to his very core. Eleanor Vance hadn't disappeared. She hadn't resigned. She was here. Murdered. Sealed away. Trapped within the very walls of the 13th floor, just as he had suspected. And Richard Thorne, the building's owner, the man who had ordered him to ignore the 13th floor, was responsible. As the full horror of the truth crashed over him, the temperature in the room plummeted to an unbearable cold. A distinct, mournful whisper like a woman's sigh seemed to emanate from the very walls, directly into his ear. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. He sealed me away. Michael dropped the note, his flashlight clattering to the concrete floor, plunging the archive into near darkness. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. He scrambled to retrieve the light, his eyes darting wildly into the oppressive shadows. He saw nothing, yet he felt everything. The profound sorrow, the lingering anger, the desperate plea of a spirit trapped for decades. He knew now. He knew the truth. Eleanor Vance, a young architect with a bright future, had been murdered and entombed within the structure of this very building, on the 13th floor, by Richard Thorne. And her ghost, restless and tormented, was trying to tell him her story, her truth. And now he was inextricably part of it. The information hit Michael like a physical blow, a sudden brutal impact that stole the air from his lungs and sent a cold dread spiraling through his veins. Sarah. Murdered. Entombed. Richard Thorne. The words echoed in the cavernous silence of his mind, each one a hammer strike against the fragile wall of his reality. He stood there, frozen, the security console's soft glow reflecting dead in his eyes, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. This wasn't some vague, unsettling phenomenon anymore. This was a crime, a horrific, decades-old secret, whispered from beyond the grave, now laid bare before him. And he, Michael Sterling, the night shift security guard, was the only one who knew. The weight of it was crushing, a responsibility he never asked for, yet one he knew with a chilling certainty he could not ignore. Disbelief warred with an undeniable, visceral conviction. His rational mind screamed, "Ghosts aren't real. You're imagining things. You're losing it." But the memory of Sarah's presence, the raw emotion, the undeniable clarity of her message, silenced the protests. It was real. All of it. The cold, the terror, the silent plea. He wasn't just observing. He was now inextricably part of her truth. He sank into his chair, running a trembling hand over his face, the cool metal of the watch on his wrist a stark anchor in the swirling chaos of his thoughts. How could he possibly prove this? How could he, a man who clocked in and out, whose biggest concern was a faulty motion sensor, expose a powerful, respected figure like Richard Thorne? The task felt utterly, terrifyingly impossible, but Sarah was counting on him. He could still feel the lingering echo of her desperation, a silent scream for justice that had resonated through the very fabric of the building. He slowly pushed himself up, his eyes scanning the familiar glowing screens of the security console. He needed evidence. Something tangible. Something that existed in the world of the living. He couldn't just walk into a police station and claim a ghost told him a murder story. They'd laugh him out of the building, or worse, have him committed. He had to think like an investigator, not a man haunted by a specter. Where did one start looking for a body entombed within the structure of a building decades after the fact? His gaze fell upon the digital archives, a vast repository of the building's lifeblood. Blueprints, maintenance logs, construction schedules, access records, a labyrinth of data stretching back to the building's inception. It was a long shot, a needle in a digital haystack, but it was the only logical place to begin. He started with the 13th floor, filtering by construction dates, renovation projects, anything that might hint at structural alterations around the time Sarah disappeared. The initial search yielded little. The 13th floor had seen minor cosmetic upgrades over the years, but no major structural work was officially logged in the period following her disappearance. It was clean, too clean, almost suspiciously so. Then he broadened his search. He started cross-referencing, looking for any unscheduled work orders, any unexplained expenditures, any anomalies in the building's otherwise meticulous records. He delved into the minutiae, the kind of boring paperwork no one ever looked at. And there, buried deep within a forgotten folder labeled Emergency Structural Integrity Checks, Q3 1993, he found it. A single cryptic entry. Section 13C. Unscheduled remedial concrete work. No further details. No contractor name. No specific location beyond Section 13C. The date? Just 3 days after Sarah's reported disappearance. A cold knot tightened in Michael's stomach. Remedial concrete work. Unscheduled. No details. It screamed cover-up. His pulse quickened, a frantic rhythm in his ears. Section 13C. It wasn't a room number, but a grid coordinate on the building's internal schematics, a part of the structural framework. He pulled up the old blueprints, overlaying them with the modern layout. Section 13C corresponded to a specific load-bearing wall on the 13th floor, running adjacent to what was now the executive conference room, directly opposite the area where the motion sensor often tripped. The very wall, he realized with a chilling certainty, that formed one side of the small, unused storage closet where he had first felt that inexplicable cold, where Sarah's presence had been strongest. The wall where the motion sensor, designed to detect movement across an empty hallway, had so persistently registered an invisible presence for years. He had to go back. Armed with this new terrifying piece of information, the 13th floor no longer felt like a place of mere mystery, but a tomb. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, the beam cutting a stark path through the darkened corridors as he made his way back to the elevator. Each floor passed with agonizing slowness, the silence heavy, pregnant with the weight of his discovery. When the doors finally chimed open on the 13th floor, the air felt different, thicker, colder. He wasn't just a security guard anymore. He was a grave robber, a truth seeker, stepping into a decades-old crime scene. The hallway was still, the motion sensor light off. He walked slowly, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the oppressive silence. He stopped directly in front of the wall, the section marked 13C on the old blueprints. It looked utterly unremarkable, a solid, painted wall, indistinguishable from the rest. But Michael knew better. He ran his hand along the surface, a shiver tracing its way up his arm. It felt cold, colder than the surrounding plaster, a subtle but distinct difference. He pressed his ear against it, listening. Nothing, just the faint hum of the building's ancient infrastructure, a ghostly murmur. He tapped it gently with his knuckles, moving systematically along the length of the wall. Most of it gave a solid, unyielding thud. But then, as he reached a spot directly behind where the motion sensor was mounted, a different sound emerged. A faint, almost imperceptible hollowness. He tapped again more deliberately. Asterisk thud. Thud. Thunk. Asterisk. The sound was unmistakable. A slight variation, a subtle echo that spoke of something less dense, something not quite as solid as the rest of the wall. It was barely there, a whisper of a difference, but to Michael it was a roar. He felt Sarah's presence intensify then. A wave of profound sadness and a quiet, desperate urgency washing over him, guiding his hand, confirming his grim discovery. This was it. This was the spot. He pulled back, staring at the innocent-looking wall, his mind reeling. He had found it. The impossible. The place where Sarah's life had been cruelly extinguished and hidden from the world. But now what? He couldn't just tear down a wall in the middle of his shift. He couldn't risk alerting anyone, especially not Thorne. He needed proof, undeniable proof, and he needed a plan. The clock was ticking. His shift would end in a few hours, the building would fill with the light of day, with people, with the very threat he was trying to expose. He had to leave, but he couldn't leave Sarah here, not again. Not now that he knew. He looked at the wall, then up at the ceiling as if Sarah herself was watching him. He made a silent vow. He would be back. He would free her. And he would make Richard Thorne pay. He was inextricably part of it, and there was no turning back. The cold steel of the hidden door clicked softly as Michael eased it shut, the sound a horrifying echo in the cavernous silence of the 13th floor. He stood there for a long moment, pressing his ear to the cool metal, half expecting a sound, a cry, anything to confirm the nightmare was real. But there was nothing. Only the hum of the building's ancient systems, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to mock his own racing pulse. He pulled his hand away, the faint scent of stale air and something metallic clinging to his skin. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run, to scream for help, to tear down the walls. But he knew that was a fool's errand. Thorn was too powerful, too protected. And Sarah was still in there. He had to be smart. He had to be methodical. With a deep, shuddering breath, Michael forced himself to move. He retraced his steps, each one deliberate, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. He moved like a ghost, the security uniform feeling like a shroud, a disguise that barely concealed the raging inferno within him. The elevator ride down was agonizingly slow, each floor number a countdown to his temporary freedom, and a reminder of Sarah's enduring captivity. He could feel the weight of her journal in his backpack, a physical anchor to the horrifying truth. He clocked out, his face a mask of practiced indifference, exchanging a terse goodnight with David, the morning shift guard. David eyed him briefly, a flicker of concern in his gaze, but Michael merely nodded, mumbled something about a long night, and walked out into the pre-dawn chill. The air hit him like a shock, sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the building. He drove home on autopilot, the city lights blurring into streaks of color, each one a flicker of the life he was now alienated from. The truth he carried was a poison, seeping into every thought, every memory. Sarah, imprisoned, alive. Thorn, a monster veiled in respectability. The images from the journal flashed in his mind. The sterile room, the chilling entries, the desperate scrawl of her handwriting. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles ached, a silent promise forming in the depths of his being. He wasn't just a security guard who stumbled upon a secret. He was now Sarah's only hope. Back in his cramped apartment, the silence was deafening. He dropped his backpack, the thud of it echoing in the small space, and sank onto his worn-out couch. He stared at the wall, seeing not the peeling paint, but the cold, unyielding concrete of Sarah's prison. He pulled out the journal, its worn leather cover feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. He opened it again, skimming the pages, the words burning themselves into his mind. They are testing something, a new kind of energy. It feeds on fear, on despair. The implications were staggering, horrifying. Thorn wasn't just a kidnapper. He was a mad scientist, a puppet master playing with human lives, with Sarah's life. The scale of it was immense, far beyond anything Michael could have imagined. This wasn't a simple case of corporate espionage or a disgruntled employee. This was something darker, more insidious, touching on the very fabric of existence. He knew he couldn't go to the police. Not yet. What would he say? I found a hidden room on the 13th floor of Thorn Industries, and my missing colleague is being held captive there, undergoing experiments with fear energy, according to her secret journal. They'd lock him up for observation, not Thorn. He needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. His mind raced, a chaotic storm of fear, anger, and a desperate need for a plan. He needed to understand Thorn's operation, his network, his vulnerabilities. Thorn controlled everything within those walls. Michael was just a guard, a nobody, but he was a nobody who knew too much, and that made him dangerous. He got up and began pacing, the carpet worn thin beneath his frantic steps. Who would believe him? Who could help? He thought of his sister, Emily, a sharp-witted lawyer, but he couldn't drag her into this. Not yet. Not until he had something concrete. He thought of his old friend David, who worked in IT, but David was too cautious. He wouldn't risk his job, his life, for a story as wild as this. He needed to think like Thorn, anticipate his moves. Thorn was meticulous, powerful. He wouldn't leave loose ends. Michael had been lucky to find that room, but Thorn would surely have contingencies. Was he being watched? Was his apartment bugged? The paranoia was a cold claw, tightening around his chest. Every creak of the building, every distant siren sounded like a threat. He remembered a detail from Sarah's journal, a seemingly innocuous line buried amidst her terror. They mentioned a Dr. Miles, always talking about the resonance frequency and the external amplifier they need to finalize. Dr. Miles. That was a name, a potential lead. He tore through the internet, searching for Dr. Miles and Thorn Industries, resonance frequency, energy research. Nothing immediately obvious came up. Thorn's operations were clearly shrouded in secrecy, likely compartmentalized. Michael pulled out his old, battered laptop, the one he barely used. He knew enough about basic security protocols from his job to know that he shouldn't be searching for this kind of information on his personal phone or work computer. He created a burner email, a fake social media profile, and began to dig. He started with public records, corporate filings, anything that might shed light on Thorne's various ventures, his associates, his research divisions. It was like sifting through sand for a single grain of gold. The hours bled into days. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford. He called in sick, citing a sudden severe flu. His supervisor, a gruff but understanding man named Carl, sounded annoyed but accepted it. Michael spent his waking hours glued to his screen, fueled by coffee and an unyielding resolve. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of data, yet simultaneously starved for a single crucial piece of information. He found mentions of various grants Thorne Industries had received for advanced energy solutions, neurocognitive enhancement, and deep space communication. The jargon was dense, designed to obscure. But the common thread was always energy, always the human mind, always something just beyond the realm of conventional science. Then a small article buried deep in an obscure online journal from 5 years ago caught his eye. It was about a controversial neuroscientist, Dr. Alastair Miles, who had been vocal about his theories on emotional energy transfer and its potential applications. The article mentioned he had disappeared from the academic scene abruptly after his funding was mysteriously pulled. The last known affiliation? A brief, uncredited mention of a research fellowship at a private, unnamed foundation. A foundation that, Michael now discovered through a convoluted chain of corporate shell companies, had direct ties to Richard Thorne. Alastair Miles, Dr. Miles, the resonance frequency, the external amplifier. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of Thorne's ambition. This was the man Sarah had mentioned. This was the architect of her torment. Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about freeing Sarah anymore. This was about stopping Thorne and Miles from unleashing whatever terrifying technology they were developing. He looked at the clock. It was almost time for his next night shift. He couldn't go back to work, not as a passive observer. He needed to get back into that building, not as a guard but as an infiltrator. He needed to find Dr. Miles. He needed to find the external amplifier. And he needed to find a way to get Sarah out. He felt a sudden sharp tremor in his pocket. His phone. It was an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice, barely audible, whispered, "You're playing with fire, Michael. Some secrets are best left buried." The line went dead. Michael stared at his phone, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Thorne knew. He was already aware. The game had just begun, and Michael was no longer just a player. He was now the hunted. Michael stared at his phone, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Thorne knew. He was already aware. The game had just begun, and Michael was no longer just a player. He was now the hunted. The world outside his security booth felt suddenly menacing, every shadow a potential threat. Thorne's voice, calm and chilling, echoed in his ears. Secrets are best left buried. But Michael couldn't bury them. He had unearthed them, and now they were clawing their way out. His shift was almost over, but going home felt like running into another cage. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He tried David again, a desperate hope. The phone rang, then went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's Michael. Call me back, man. It's urgent." Thorne, he knows. He knows everything. He hung up, a cold dread replacing his earlier fear. David was gone. Thorne had gotten to him, or David had simply vanished, too terrified to stay. Michael was truly alone in this. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The 13th floor, always dark, always triggering the sensor. David's terrified warnings. Thorne's sudden appearance, his veiled threats, his insistence that the floor was empty. It wasn't empty. It was a cover. A very elaborate, very dangerous cover. Michael knew what he had to do. He couldn't just observe anymore. He had to act. He had to get to the 13th floor, not just to see but to document. He needed undeniable proof. He needed to expose Thorne. And he had to do it before Thorne could silence him permanently. His final shift approached. He spent the day meticulously preparing. He bought a small, high-resolution camera, a powerful flashlight, and a portable data drive. He studied the building blueprints he'd managed to acquire from a dusty old filing cabinet, noting every access point, every blind spot in the surveillance. He researched Thorne, finding nothing but a spotless professional record. The man was a ghost, a master of deception. When he clocked in for his last night shift, the weight of his mission pressed down on him. The building felt different, alive with an unseen tension. He moved through his usual rounds, his senses heightened, every creak and groan of the old structure a potential warning. He checked the cameras, noting the familiar, unsettling flicker on the 13th floor monitor, the motion sensor, still reacting to nothing visible. Around 2 a.m. he knew it was time. He had to make his move. He sent a pre-scheduled email to a trusted, anonymous contact he'd found online, an investigative journalist specializing in corporate corruption. The email contained a brief, cryptic message: evidence of major illicit activity at Sterling Plaza 13th floor. If you don't hear from me by 6 a.m., check your inbox for a follow-up. My name is Michael Hayes. It was his insurance policy. He took the elevator to the 12th floor, then switched to the emergency stairwell. He moved slowly, silently, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The air grew colder as he ascended, a palpable chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. When he reached the 13th floor landing, he hesitated, his hand on the cold metal door handle. This was it, the point of no return. He pushed the door open just a crack. The familiar, inky blackness greeted him, deeper than any natural darkness. He slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The silence was absolute, suffocating. He took a deep breath, the metallic tang of stale air filling his lungs. He switched on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the vast, empty space. Dust motes danced in the light. No furniture, no office equipment, just concrete floors and bare walls. But then he noticed it. Not in the main hallway, but tucked away in a corner, barely visible behind a support column. A faint hum, a low, persistent vibration that he could feel through the soles of his shoes. He moved cautiously, flashlight held high. The hum grew louder, a deep resonance that vibrated through his chest. He rounded the column and his breath hitched. The entire corner of the floor, an area easily the size of a small office, was filled with rows upon rows of massive, custom-built server racks. They glowed with an eerie, rhythmic pulse of blue and green LED lights, their fans whirring with the collective, powerful drone. Cables snaked everywhere, disappearing into conduits in the floor and ceiling. This wasn't just a server room, it was a fortress of data. And then he saw him. Thorn. Thorn stood amidst the glowing racks, his back to Michael, fiddling with a complex control panel. He wore a dark, form-fitting suit, his silhouette stark against the luminous machinery. Michael froze, his heart hammering. Thorn hadn't heard him. He was too engrossed, too focused on his illicit empire. Michael raised his camera, his hands trembling slightly, and began to take pictures, careful to capture the sheer scale of the operation, the custom modifications, the sheer illegality of it all. This wasn't just a few rogue servers. This was an industrial-scale data center, hidden in plain sight, likely powering the darkest corners of the internet. Dark web hosting, cryptocurrency laundering, stolen data storage. David's evil was not a ghost, but the insidious digital corruption being conducted here. The motion sensor wasn't malfunctioning. It was reacting to the subtle vibrations of hundreds of powerful servers and the occasional presence of Thorn or his technicians. He heard a faint click behind him. He spun around, flashlight beam darting. The door. It was closed. He hadn't heard it. Thorn must have. I knew you'd come, Michael. Thorn's voice, calm and devoid of emotion, echoed through the server hum. He slowly turned, a small, menacing smile playing on his lips. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? Some secrets, Michael, are best left buried. Michael gripped his flashlight tighter, his camera still clutched in his other hand. You're running an illegal data operation, Thorn. This entire floor. It's a front for something massive. Thorn chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Massive? Oh, much more than that, Michael. This is the backbone for operations that would make your hair stand on end. State secrets, corporate espionage, global financial manipulation. All routed through my little corner of the world. And you, a humble security guard, stumbled into it like a fly into a spider web. David knew, didn't he? Michael challenged, trying to buy time, trying to think. That's why he warned me. That's why he disappeared. Thorn's smile didn't falter. David was an unfortunate casualty of curiosity. He saw too much, asked too many questions. A simple fall down the stairs ruled accidental. Tragic, really. A cold dread washed over Michael. David hadn't just disappeared. Thorn had killed him. And now you, Michael, Thorn continued, slowly advancing, his eyes glinting in the server light. "You're about to have your own tragic accident. The building has a lot of dark corners, Michael. And accidents happen all the time." Michael knew he couldn't fight Thorn. He was bigger, stronger, and clearly ruthless. He had to escape with the evidence. He glanced at the emergency exit sign at the far end of the server farm. A faint red glow. It was his only way out. "You won't get away with this, Thorn," Michael said, his voice trembling but firm. "I've already sent out a message. If I don't report in, everything I found goes public." Thorn paused, his expression hardening. "A desperate bluff. I've heard it before. But even if you did, by the time anyone checks, the data will be wiped, the server's gone. And you'll just be another mystery." He lunged. Michael reacted on instinct, swinging his heavy flashlight in a wide arc. It connected with Thorn's arm with a sickening thud. Thorn roared in pain, stumbling back. Michael didn't wait. He bolted, weaving through the glowing server racks, the hum of the machines a deafening roar in his ears. Thorn recovered quickly, his footsteps thundering behind Michael. Michael reached the emergency exit, fumbling with the crash bar. He burst through, desperate for the stairs, for freedom. He didn't make it far. A sudden, powerful shove from behind sent him sprawling. He hit the concrete stairs hard, his head cracking against the unforgiving surface. Pain exploded behind his eyes. He felt a hand snatch the camera from his grasp. Thorn stood over him, breathing heavily, the camera now in his hand. "Foolish boy," he snarled, raising the camera. "Did you really think I wouldn't find a way to destroy your little toy?" But Michael had anticipated this. Even as Thorn smashed the camera against the concrete, Michael's hand went to his pocket. He pulled out the portable data drive, small and easily concealed, and with a surge of adrenaline he hurled it down the stairwell. It clattered down several flights, a tiny metallic echo in the vast darkness. Thorn stared, his eyes widening in fury. He looked from Michael to the disappearing drive, a primal scream tearing from his throat. He turned back to Michael, his face contorted with rage. "You think that will save you? I'll find it, and I'll make sure you regret this." Michael, dizzy and disoriented, struggled to his feet. He knew he had bought himself precious seconds, maybe minutes. He had to keep moving. He pushed past Thorn, who was now staring down the stairwell, calculating. Michael stumbled down the stairs, the pain in his head throbbing, but a fierce determination burning in his chest. He ran, adrenaline fueling his escape, until he burst out of the emergency exit on the ground floor, gasping for air. He didn't stop until he was outside, the cold night air a shock to his lungs. He heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. It was 5:58 a.m. His insurance policy had paid off. The police swarmed the building, alerted by the anonymous journalist who had received Michael's 6 a.m. email. They found the discarded data drive several floors down, intact. They found the smashed camera, and they found the 13th floor, humming with illicit activity, a digital heart beating in the darkness. Thorn was apprehended, found trying to delete files from a terminal, his face a mask of defeat. The scale of his operation, the network of criminal enterprises it supported, shocked even the hardened investigators. The something evil David had sensed was exposed, not as a ghost, but as the chilling reality of human greed and corruption. Michael was hailed as a hero, though he didn't feel like one. He had lost his job, his sense of security, and the innocence of his night shifts. The building Sterling Plaza was forever changed, its dark secret brought into the light. The 13th floor was sealed off, its illegal machinery dismantled, a testament to the shadows that can hide in plain sight. He never went back to security work. The quiet hum of empty buildings, the flicker of motion sensors, they just weren't the same. But sometimes, late at night, when the world was asleep, Michael would remember the glowing server racks, the chilling words of Thorn, and the unsettling truth that some of the greatest evils aren't supernatural, but are born from the darkest corners of humanity, waiting to be unearthed by someone brave enough to look. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he had done the right thing. He had stopped the game, and he had survived being the hunted.